Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 19 of Remember the Magic. In this show, we take a deep dive into everything old and extinct Disney. Today's episode is very special and calls for a different kind of introduction. Not only is this the long-awaited return of this series after longer than I'd like to admit, we're bringing it back in style today with a festive holiday special covering one of the most classic offerings in Disney history, and a personal favorite at that, Disneyland in Anaheim, California's long-running and much-beloved A Christmas Fantasy Parade. Now, on this very special night, we wish we may, we wish we might, have the wish we wish tonight, so let the magic begin. The history of this parade arguably goes all the way back to when Disneyland opened in 1955. Being quite the devout Christian, Walt Disney himself from the beginning was chomping at the bit to bring the magic of Christmas time into his brand new family entertainment park. And while Christmas of 1955 brought about the all-but-forgotten and chaotically created Mickey Mouse Club Circus, and with it the Christmas Show Parade, which of course birthed the most iconic of Walt Disney quotations, "God damn you, this is my circus," but we're not even going to begin to get into that mess today. Nope, instead we're going to move on ahead a couple of years to 1957, where what could be considered the very first solely Christmas parade at Disneyland was created. The Christmas in Many Lands Parade was... well, it sure was something. Obviously, it being within the first 24 months the park was open, it was bound to be not the best-looking thing ever by modern standards. But on top of that, while at the time I'm sure it was fondly looked upon, with modern eyes, it's hard to see most of this parade as anything other than a series of shockingly insensitive representations of various cultures. Other than the casual racism and some admittedly jarring appearances, such as live animals and other such oddities just walking down the street as part of the parade, this offering truly wasn't all that notable. It was really just a starting point that subsequent offerings were able to use as a springboard to bring more advanced things in later. But it is worth mentioning that one of the interesting things about this parade is on numerous occasions, pending his availability, the parade would often feature Walt Disney himself riding along with the show. While the actual contents of Christmas in Many Lands can look very shocking by today's standards, in the 1950s this was one of the only, if not frankly the only way an average American would be able to casually learn about the various holiday season traditions from around the world without mounting the effort for a full-on research paper or international expedition. Walt's fascination with other world cultures can be attributed to his visions of global unity and peace, and his fascination with these topics over 60 years ago have continued in the modern era with offerings such as the Festival of the Holidays event at both Epcot and Walt Disney World, and right here at home at Disney California Adventure, both of which of course represent holiday traditions from around the world celebrated through special food and entertainment offerings. Christmas in Many Lands ended up sticking around for quite a while, as few other entertainment offerings did in the early days of the park, albeit even seasonal ones. Only taking a one-season hiatus in 1961 for a new Christmas toy parade that only ended up lasting one season. Christmas in Many Lands ended up running all the way until 1964, when the following year it would finally be replaced with a brand new offering. 1965 would bring about the first season of the long-running and fondly remembered Christmas Fantasy on Parade. Being the last entertainment offering Walt created before his death exactly 1 year later in December of 1966, it can be said that this parade was the culmination of everything Walt had learned about entertaining audiences in a live setting. While looking at it through a modern lens can reveal several questions about many of the parade's choices, for 1965 this was incredibly advanced. The show even had a prominent feature in the 1967 film Disneyland Around the Seasons, notable for being the very first episode of Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color that aired after his 1966 passing. Partially out of respect to Walt, and mostly because the company without its creative leader was a lot like a chicken with its head cut off, Christmas Fantasy on Parade would last from 1965 well into the 1970s and even into the 80s. While changes and alterations were made occasionally in the form of new floats and units inspired by different movies or IPs, the parade ended up running in one form or another all the way through the late 80s, only closing permanently in 1986. The parade even made the Great Colossal Migration in the late 70s, when in 1978 a clone of it premiered at Walt Disney World for its very first seasonal parade. While little is documented about the lead-up to the change from Christmas Fantasy on Parade to its replacement we'll talk about shortly, it can be assumed based on the timing that this decision was likely driven by the Michael Eisner and Frank Wells mandate to begin modernizing the parks that followed their arrival in 1984. As soon as the dynamic duo took the reins of the company in hand, it became clear that the ways things had been running for the past decade and a half would not be the norm anymore. The 70s era what would Walt have done mentality drove the company almost to bankruptcy, and it became abundantly clear that just because Walt Disney founded the company back in the 20s didn't mean that the best practice was posthumously having him run the company through other people's best guesses of his decisions. Almost immediately after Eisner and Wells arrived, they hit the ground running, first putting on Band-Aid after Band-Aid to the struggling company, from bringing the animation studios back from the dead by greenlighting surefire hits like The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, to providing equally as effective changes to the parks with additions such as Captain EO and Star Tours. The 80s became a renaissance for the Disney company as a whole. Entertainment wasn't left out of this initiative either. Old entertainment got a shake-up and new offerings came in altogether. One of the things that was seen as outdated by the mid-80s was the more than 20-year-old Christmas Fantasy on Parade. Eisner likely saw the parade as quite behind the times by that point. It arguably wasn't even the best Christmas parade at Disneyland anymore since 1985, when the legendary Main Street Electrical Parade began receiving a holiday overlay with light decoration and a festive soundtrack. November of 1987 brought about the premiere of the brand new Very Merry Christmas Parade. This new show could be seen as a modernization of Christmas Fantasy on Parade, with a full lineup of new and returning, well-decorated floats, a synced soundtrack in the same vein as the Main Street Electrical Parade and other modern offerings, and so much more. A clone of the parade also opened at Walt Disney World the same year, a near-identical version of the Western incarnation. However, modern for the 80s still leaves a lot to the imagination, and this parade was really no exception. Despite being billed as a Christmas-themed parade, the festive elements of the show were all but non-existent until the very tail end. This had been an element of Christmas Fantasy on Parade as well, that being that it was essentially just a regular Disney character daytime parade, with all the characters you might expect in units themed to their various movies and IPs, only with a couple of holiday-specific parts at the very end. Typically varying season to season, these would include a candy shop, toy factory, and the arrival of Santa Claus. While Very Merry Christmas Parade did provide a much-needed overhaul to all elements of the parade, both IP-centric and Christmas-themed, it still had that very distinct break towards the end where the parade went from one theme to another, finally delivering on the promise of being a show themed to the holiday season. The ideas seemed like oil and water, like Disney characters and Christmas-time traditions existed in separate worlds from each other. By the early 90s, with the company doing better than ever and expansion of the parks proceeding rapidly, entertainment around Disneyland and Walt Disney World was not left out. We got brand new stage shows like One Man's Dream and Splashtacular, a new generation of parades like Party Gras and Spectro Magic, and the incredible icing on the cake that was the addition of the nighttime spectacular Fantasmic in the spring of 1992. And the latter is actually where our story takes us next. Longtime choreographer and show director for the Disney parks, Barnett Ritchie, had been pushing for years to bring more nightlife to the Disneyland resort. Sure, the Main Street Electrical Parade had been running for 20 years, and by this point the nightly Fantasy in the Sky fireworks were a wonderful kiss goodnight, but she wanted an evening at Disneyland to end with a bang. Combining elements of live performance, pyrotechnics, water effects, animatronics, fire, and much more, Fantasmic was the perfect way to conclude a visit to the happiest place on Earth. Ritchie wasn't alone on working on Fantasmic, though. She had the performance element covered for sure, but she needed help on the composing front. This new show could dazzle people's socks off visually, but it wouldn't be able to get off its feet if it didn't have an equally spectacular soundtrack. Ritchie turned her sights to an up-and-coming musical talent at the Walt Disney Company. Originally hired as part of the Disneyland Band and fresh off the heels of arranging the popular Disney sing-along songs Let's Go to Disneyland special, Bruce Healey had never actually composed anything from scratch for Disney before. An Anaheim local all his life, Bruce felt he had been given the chance of a lifetime when Barnett Ritchie approached him with the chance to compose Fantasmic's energetic new soundtrack. All these years later, Healey still considers Fantasmic to be his magnum opus for the Walt Disney Company, and says himself that you'll many times be able to find him in the throes of the crowds along the rivers of America most nights just watching the spectacle unfold. Now, I'm sure you're asking yourself, what does any of this have to do with Christmas parades? Well, I'm getting there. Fantasmic really brought about a new age of entertainment for Disney, and combined with other notable successes at the time, such as Spectro Magic and Party Gras, it was clear shows with one coherent theme from beginning to end were the way to go going forward. And so that left the Very Merry Christmas Parade. While the offering simply built on the classic legacy of Christmas Fantasy on Parade, reusing much of its infrastructure and theme, even a much-needed modernization wasn't quite enough to catapult it into the 1990s. In a world where a typical day at Disneyland in the summer could include one of many rotating stage shows at the Fantasyland Theater, a viewing of the zany World According to Goofy parade, a spectacular journey beyond the wildest of imagination in Fantasmic, and a kiss goodnight in fireworks form, Very Merry Christmas Parade just really didn't live up to the same standard. And so, following the 1994 holiday season, it was decided that the following year, a new holiday parade would be brought in. As work began backstage, both redecorating and renovating older parade floats to go into the new offering, as well as to construct some brand new units and costumes, the powerhouse duo of show directors worked on the show's technical elements as well as its brand new soundtrack. And in late November of 1995, the brand new A Christmas Fantasy Parade officially debuted to the public. A Christmas Fantasy was an instant success. With a name paying tribute to the original long-running offering from years past and a cleverly executed new theme, this new parade blew people's socks off upon its debut. Departing from the Christmas parades of the past, this new offering wasn't just a character cavalcade with a festive finale. The entire show from beginning to end was themed to the magic of the holidays. Throughout the different themed units, various Disney characters could be seen celebrating different facets of the holiday season, from Goofy making a life-size gingerbread house to a royal ball with the various princes and princesses, of course with Cinderella's evil stepsisters and stepmother attempting to steal the spotlight. Following its final performance in its inaugural season of January 7th of 1996, it came as no surprise when the parade returned again the following holiday season, as it had become an instant classic. Although it's not uncommon for the parade to experience a few changes from year to year, ranging from incredibly minor to quite striking, the A Christmas Fantasy Parade has become an absolute staple of the holiday season at the Disneyland Resort. The parade continued to run between November and January every single year until the historic shutdown of the Disneyland Resort in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic in March of 2020. While the holiday season of 2020 made history with the entirety of the resort remaining closed through the end of the year, of course meaning that none of the holiday entertainment offering could be presented, following the April of 2021 reopening at the parks, and specifically the Halloween season of 2021, when the hard-ticketed event Oogie Boogie Bash brought about the first full parade to return since the shutdown with the frightfully fun Halloween parade, November 12th of 2021 brought about the return of the first American Disney Park parade to return to daily operations, not connected to a separate ticketed event, when for the first time in 23 months, A Christmas Fantasy held its long-awaited return to Disneyland Park. While the parade had been altered somewhat in accordance to the state of California's social distancing safety guidelines, as well as in line with Disney's own budgetary concerns, the following season brought somewhat of a full return to form for the parade, where though some very minor things were still missing, the vast majority of the parade had been returned to its pre-pandemic glory and was on track to remain that way for the foreseeable future. But then April of 2023 happened, and the very show that birthed the creative team of A Christmas Fantasies suffered a terrible accident that sent the Disneyland Resort reeling. On April 22nd, 2023, during the 10:15 performance of Fantasmic, the Maleficent Dragon animatronic figure used during the show's climactic final battle suffered a major malfunction that set the figure ablaze. The fire was extinguished, and thankfully no injuries were reported from the show's performing cast, but the figure was damaged beyond repair, and despite some early efforts to get the show back on its feet, it quickly became clear that Fantasmic would not be able to be performed for quite some time. The fire was not only a very flashy and spectacular end to one of the most complicated and infamous animatronic figures in Disney's history, the accident made a deep cut to Disneyland's entertainment department. On top of leaving the cast and crew shaken and in some cases jobless, the loss of the revenue from the show's impact in the parks, from direct things such as dining packages and VIP seats, to even just the incentive to stay late and buy dinner, sent ripples through the Disney parks globally, but especially in Disneyland. On top of fire effects being suspended as a precaution, many cuts were made throughout the rest of the year. One of the results of this cost-cutting was a slightly reduced year for the Christmas Fantasy Parade, with some cuts to performing talent and even a couple of floats getting axed. But hopefully when the company financially recovers, it will be back to normal. And that brings us all the way up to today. As of November 10th, 2023, the parade has once again returned to Disneyland for the season, where it will be running through January 7th. And with no end really in sight, it can be assumed that this holiday classic will continue running for a long, long time. Now that we have all that history covered, let's move on to the parade's design. Since the beginning, this parade has been jam-packed with details, and with minute details comes a multitude of changes over the years. So without wasting any time, let's dive right into it. While the parade has always had one performance during daylight and one during night, since 1997, the nighttime performance has been supplemented by theater-style lighting along the parade route. While this was all fluorescent bulbs and gel-style lighting up until recently, when the parade returned in the 2022 holiday season, audiences were surprised by the addition of a brand new LED lighting package using the brand new updated lighting fixtures Disney installed after the old ones were left out to rot during the closure. Each unit of the parade has its own special lighting, as well as the opening, pre-parade, and closing, barring any complications. As the first unit makes its appearance, we also get our first taste of the soundtrack. Specifically, the new song written for the parade by Bruce Healey, appropriately titled A Christmas Fantasy. While the song is a holiday classic around the Disney community, it is notable that while somewhat on the way out in the mid-90s, it wasn't uncommon for a parade soundtrack to have a somewhat rough loop or a completely non-existent one. And this is no exception. In 2023, this parade soundtrack is the very last annually performed at the Disneyland Resort, at the very least, that still has a non-looping soundtrack, where the music simply ends and the song starts over. If you want to count Mickey's Happy Holidays at DCA, I mean, technically, yes, that has a non-looping soundtrack too, but it would be quite the stretch to actually call Happy Holidays a parade. Anyway, throughout the entire parade, different verses of the song can be heard mixed with various Christmas songs. Here in the opening unit, either an instrumental or full vocal version of How Much Longer Till Christmas can be heard depending on where in the unit you are. But as the first float arrives and the parade officially begins, so too does our journey through the multitude of changes this show has seen over the years. The first piece of the parade to appear is the Music Box float. Recycled from the World According to Goofy parade from 1992, this float depicts a stack of books upon which an open music box is seen. Perched on top of the music box is a ballerina, and at her side, a plush bear. While typically a traditional, non-Disney themed version of the bear, in the 2011 and 2012 holiday seasons, Disney experimented putting Duffy the Disney bear in its place. If you've never heard of Duffy before, he is the first in a long line of Tokyo Disney Sea specific characters started in 2004. While Japanese guests love Duffy and his friends, they sadly never really caught on in the States, though as of recently, audiences are getting a second chance to fall in love with Duffy and his friends, and so far it seems to be successful. So who knows, Duffy might come back to the parade someday. Anyway, in 2013, the bear was reverted back to its original version, though Duffy was placed in the following mailroom unit for a few seasons before disappearing for good, at least up to date, in 2015. The costume the ballerina wears has also changed throughout the years. While originally dressed in what I can only describe as a strikingly Bavarian costume, only 1 year later in the 1996 season, the opening window was updated to give the ballerina a more childlike look, with a new pink gown. Also in 1996, some of the characters of the 100 Acre Wood were added to the unit in pajamas dancing around with children. While these characters have been seen in various units in this parade throughout the years, they appeared here in the opening until 2002. Though after the 1999 season, they appeared behind the float as opposed to preceding it. Also in 2002, the ballerina's gown was altered once again, this time becoming a more prominently white and turquoise-based variation, one that is still seen in the parade today. The float itself has also seen a few minor alterations throughout the years, such as the Disneyland logo being altered and eventually removed, and the backdrop inside of the Christmas wreath originally showing the parade's logo also being removed before the 2013 season. The opening float is followed by the toy soldiers from Babes in Toyland, though in some years they appear before the opening unit. Being a staple in Christmas parades since the 1950s, these adorable and somewhat menacing figures serenade onlookers with live trumpet and drum performances alongside the parade, along with percussive marching. A fan favorite among guests, these little guys have appeared in many forms throughout the years, even getting a face character treatment for the Festival of the Holidays at Disney California Adventure in 2017. However, this version of the costume is still yet to appear in ACF, likely due to the fact that the theme of the parade is meant to be reminiscent of a children's toy box, and live-action toy soldiers with real faces don't exactly fit that mold, clearly. In 2023, these fan-favorite characters received the collectible treatment with the release of a special holiday popcorn bucket of Mickey Mouse himself, fashioned as one of the iconic trumpet-playing soldiers. Following the music box and toy soldiers comes the Santa's Mailroom unit. Originally featuring Mrs. Claus and Santa's elves, after the 2013 season, due to some changes in the preceding unit we'll discuss shortly, Mickey and Minnie were moved, joining the previously appearing Donald, Daisy, and occasionally Pluto. Moving the dynamic duo to the mailroom float did, however, result in the eviction of Mrs. Claus, as Donald and Daisy were moved back to her place, eventually being themselves replaced with Chip and Dale in 2015. Following this change, Daisy has yet to make her return to A Christmas Fantasy, as Donald was moved to Pluto's former position perched above the float. Mrs. Claus herself was strikingly absent from the parade for several years as well, after the rest of the gang got moved here. However, she was reinstated in 2019, now walking alongside the elves in front of the unit. This section of the parade, of course, consists of a sizable float, specifically a redressed Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs float from the Very Merry Christmas parade. Ironically, the dwarves themselves were added alongside the elves and Mrs. Claus for a short while in the late 1990s, before being removed in the early 2000s. Also, between 1999 and 2001, the entire float was moved to later in the Toy Factory unit, but this change was short-lived and reversed in 2002. Though originally followed by the Toy Factory unit, ever since the 2003 season, the Santa's Mailroom unit is followed by the Winter Wonderland. As Sleigh Ride and Frosty the Snowman are melted into the main soundtrack, the unit is physically opened by a book float, recycled from The World According to Goofy, a theme from the parade that will become quite common as we move forward. Though in the earlier years, this float itself was decorated as a scroll. This is notable as it was the only float in this parade even at the time that was decorated in this way. The float is followed by dancers on roller skates resembling snowflakes that glide alongside a beautiful winter-themed Christmas tree float. This tree has been altered slightly throughout the years, most recently in 2023 when all the lights on it were replaced with LEDs and the snow covering was changed from a white powder coating the entire float to small foam sections of snow being attached to various limbs, as well as new ornaments. The design of the skating snowflakes has also changed quite a bit over the years. From 1995 to 2010, the costumes featured the dancers very bundled in winter clothes with dangling hats on top and a foam snowflake attached on the back. However, they were altered in 2011, giving the dancers a more elegant look with nicer jackets as well as feathered caps. The snowflake props were also changed this year and were now a much less rigid, glossy foil. However, in 2014, when the entire unit received an overhaul, most of the feathering as well as the physical snowflake props on the backs of the dancers were removed and weren't reinstated for another 5 years before they made their momentous return in 2019 with a new design that's a bit of a mix of the two styles, now with what appears to be a foam structure wrapped in a glossy fabric. Also, after 2009, the beginning of the Winter Wonderland section was accompanied by Winnie the Pooh, Tigger, and Eeyore riding, or in Eeyore's case pulling, small snow sleds. They were removed due to budget constraints in 2019. Pooh, the tree, and the book are all followed by a group of 8 snowmen dressed in a multitude of adorable and unique costumes. Replacing more retro, almost terrifying versions of the costumes in 2001, as well as increasing their number, while there are 11 in total, 8 are only ever put out at one time, and it is up to the discretion of the parade's cast members to determine the snowy cast on a day-to-day basis. Many people also do not know that the snow people all have names. The one in the pink scarf with the yellow hat is Ginger, the rosy-cheeked green scarf wearing one decorated with grapes in her hat is Hortense, the red scarf blue hat combo wearing Charlie, the luscious lashes belonging to Lillian, the yellow hat and striped scarf Skip, the freckled farmer girlie Martha, the beanie with yellow scarf Dickie, the polka-dotted icon appropriately named Dottie, the turn-of-the-century fashioned Agnes, the winter cap wearing Bert, and seemingly everyone's favorite, the ball cap and scarf wearing Dewey. These adorable icons are followed by a snowy platform float, also originally from the Very Merry Christmas Parade. While originally featuring Chip and Dale in a snowball fight, in 2002 they were removed and replaced with Mickey and Minnie skating on the float. However, in 2014, following the release of the box office cash cow Frozen, the unit as a whole was redone to tie into the movie. As previously mentioned, Mickey and Minnie were moved to the mailroom, now no longer skating, and in fact, the skating element of the float was removed entirely, now replaced with Anna and Elsa on a new higher platform, as well as a somewhat restricted movement Olaf animatronic figure. Also in 2014, an additional performing ensemble was added to the Winter Wonderland with 4 skiers on modified rollerblades. These were a favorite among fans for some time, only being removed from the parade in 2021 due to the social distancing restrictions before returning in 2022. However, following the Fantasmic fire, this performing unit was one of the casualties of the cost-cutting measures following, and they were removed prior to the 2023 season, though it is assumed they will return in 2024 when the Nighttime River Show returns and operations are back to normal. In the early days of the parade, Aladdin, Jasmine, and the Genie appeared too in a speedy magic sleigh beginning in 1996. However, they disappeared after the 2005 season along with the scroll theming on the book, returning it to its original state, matching the others in the parade. Also, following the release of Beauty and the Beast's Enchanted Christmas in 1997, the titular couple were moved from the upcoming Princesses unit to the Winter Wonderland in 1998, where they remained for just 2 seasons before being reinstated in their former positions in 2000. Up next is the Recipe for Gingerbread Treats unit, mixing the show's soundtrack with a sugary rendition of Deck the Halls, as well as a ballet version of the Sugar Plum Fairy. This is notably the shortest section in the parade, and the one that has seen the fewest changes since 1995. It begins with yet another book recycled from World According to Goofy, and some dancers dressed as bakers alongside Clarabelle Cow. Gingerbread men are also featured, dancing alongside the bakers. Until 2012, they were accompanied by a wheelbarrow filled with flour sacks that the bakers would hurl at each other in a playful display of violence. They are followed by the Gingerbread House float, which dates all the way back to Fantasy on Parade, being one of very few floats in the parade to survive both revitalizations, though it has seen a good few changes, mainly in extending the base platform out further on the front of the float to allow more room for performers, and the characters featured as well. Originally it featured Daisy and Clarabelle, but they were replaced with, of all things, a Mad Tea Party scene in 1998 featuring Alice and the Mad Hatter. This, however, did not last long, and they were removed in 2000, with Clarabelle joining the Bakers up front, and the characters residing on the float being replaced in favor of Max and Goofy. Though as the character's popularity slowly faded from public view, Max was also removed in favor of Pluto in 2013, taking him out of the earlier mailroom unit. This float also projects a gingerbread smell out of the smoking chimney and has many props and objects that the characters can utilize and play with. Next up comes the Candlelight Christmas unit. Cinderella's evil stepsisters Anastasia and Drusilla cause chaos up front while Lady Tremaine attempts to make the pair look civilized, all while the soundtrack turns for a romantic side and Merry Christmas from Me to You is heard. They're followed by the true beginning of the unit, again with a book from World According to Goofy. Elegantly dressed pairs of ballroom dancers are seen alongside many of Disney's most famous royal couples. While the characters featured have experienced a few changes throughout the years in their placement, nowadays the couples featured are Belle and the Beast, Aurora and Philip, Ariel and Eric, Cinderella and Prince Charming, Snow White and Prince Florian, and the most recent addition added in 2013, Tiana and Naveen. They appear on the streets as well as on an elegant terrace float, which was recycled from the Very Merry Christmas Parade, where it carried characters from Fantasia, specifically Hyacinth Hippo in a Dance of the Hours themed unit. Again, cementing in place just how unthemed and grab bag style the Very Merry Christmas Parade really was. While originally the couples would appear mostly on foot with Lumiere from Beauty and the Beast taking up residence in the center of the float, beginning in 1996, Lumiere was moved up front and the royals would switch between walking and being carried on the terrace float. Though this element of the choreography was retired in the mid-2010s due to performer safety concerns. As previously mentioned, Belle and the Beast were briefly moved to the previous Winter Wonderland unit in 1998 following the release of their Christmas special, but with them gone, just 1 year later, Lumiere was removed as well in 1999. And even upon the couple's return in 2000, Lumiere did not come back to the unit with them. For a while, this was all followed by another glistening Christmas tree float decorated with candles and other regal items, but it was removed in 2002 and moved to a different unit later in the parade where it was rethemed. Originally followed by the previously talked about Winter Wonderland unit, since 2009, the Toy Factory unit follows up the Candlelight Christmas, with squeaks, beeps, and playful additions to the soundtrack, as well as an orchestral version of Toyland Toyland. Once again, beginning with yet another book from World According to Goofy, originally, 2 toy block floats carrying Ariel from The Little Mermaid and Roger Rabbit followed. However, the Roger Rabbit one was removed in 1999 and retooled to become Toy Story themed, with the Ariel one also going away in 2006. A toy car is also seen. Originally featuring Chip and Dale, they were moved to the Winter Wonderland unit for a while, before 2015 where they were moved up to the mailroom float to be replaced by Jessie and a Green Army Man driver. They're followed by one of the remade toy block floats, now featuring Woody riding on a rocking horse. The other toy block float could also be seen, rethemed to Buzz Lightyear's spaceship. Due to the Fantasmic fire-related cost-cutting measures, Buzz, Spaceship, and Jessie's car were removed from the parade in 2023, and it is unknown if they will return in the future. Jessie now walks in front of the opening book float for the unit, and Buzz was moved to the front position on the next float we're going to talk about. The main part of the unit is the Toy Factory float, accompanied by many of Santa's elves helping out with toy production. This was originally a reused float dating back to Fantasy on Parade, though possibly to provide a few changes, a Ferris wheel was tacked on the back of it for the second season of the parade in 1996. The unit featured Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket, with Geppetto being added in later years, though due to the float's age, it was retired in 2008 and replaced with this stunning updated version of the float. The new absolutely giant parade float shows the entire process of the creation of a toy, from raw materials being fed into a machine by Santa's elves, to the finished product being displayed on the next section of the float, eventually being painted and wrapped by the back section coming out onto a conveyor belt, feeding directly into Santa's sack ready for shipping. Even the elves in the back of the float carry finished products of the items they were just seen creating on the front side. Alongside the changes to the Humdinger car and the toy block floats, in 2015, Geppetto, Pinocchio, and Jiminy were retired in favor of 3 Green Army Men from Toy Story. And in 2023, the furthest front Green Army Man on the front of the float was removed in favor of the displaced Buzz Lightyear since his rocket ship unit was retired. Also in 2023, as an homage to the 100th anniversary of the Walt Disney Company, a Steamboat Willie toy boat was added prominently to the back of the float. It's also worth noting that between 1999 and 2001, the previously mentioned mailroom float from the opening unit of the parade was incorporated into the Toy Factory as well. This is when the mailroom was themed to the 7 Dwarves, and it was meant to be a follow-up to the actual Toy Factory where the dwarves were sorting through the letters to Santa determining what toys the children would receive. Possibly due to this not making much sense, the float was returned to its previous spot following the ballerina in the opening unit in 2002. The ground performers in this unit have also changed through the years. Originally, it was toy dolls and various Disney characters. Then it was solely the toy dolls for a while, dressed as Raggedy Ann for some reason. And now, ever since the 2003 season, the unit consists of more of Santa's elves. The Toy Factory almost serves as a mini finale for the parade, as next up is the last unit. Twas the Night Before Christmas, otherwise known as Santa's Arrival in later years, is the only unit in the parade not to be opened by a book-themed float. Instead, carolers greet us and sing their merry tunes, with renditions of Jingle Bells, Deck the Halls, and We Wish You a Merry Christmas, heard along with the underliner soundtrack. These carolers have had many costume changes throughout the years, but we'll cover that in a minute, because first we need to talk about everyone's favorite topic, reused and later retired parade floats. In the early days of this parade, beginning in its opening season, the unit opened with a Christmas Village float, reminiscent of A Christmas Carol, featuring Scrooge McDuck and Donald, as well as some carolers. But it was removed in 2001. It's unknown if this was something that had been previously planned or if it was a direct response to cost-cutting measures put in place as a response to the tourism drop following the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Actually, this float itself has a bit of a weird history, though, as it was the only float in the parade originally not from either a previously appearing Christmas parade or one of the cannibalized book floats from The World According to Goofy. Instead, this float actually dated back to 1991's Celebration USA parade, which was a daytime parade which closed permanently in 1993. However, the retiring of the float from ACF in 2000 wasn't the end of this thing's life, as in 2005, in the lead-up to Disneyland's 50th anniversary, between the end of the Parade of the Stars in late 2004 and the premiere of Walt Disney's Parade of Dreams in May of 2005, a series of cavalcades debuted while work was being done along the parade route, two of which have some very strange connections to this parade. The first of which, Sleeping Beauty's Royal Celebration, actually used the Candlelight Christmas terrace float that we talked about earlier. But one of the other temporary offerings, Mickey's Magic Kingdom Celebration, used a stripped-down and rethemed version of the retired Christmas Village caroling float. Of course, this parade was temporary, and following the limited-time offering's conclusion, the float went on to become part of the Halloween-themed Mickey's Costume Party Cavalcade in 2010, before eventually finding its final usage to date as a Haunted Mansion float in the Frightfully Fun Halloween Parade in its inaugural 2016 season, before finally getting permanently retired and replaced in 2022. Getting back on track with ACF, another Christmas tree float was added to the unit in 2003, reusing the one moved from the Candlelight Christmas unit from the previous year, as it was decided that the finale could use a little extra life. The tree has been modified slightly over the years, most recently in 2023 when all the lights were replaced with LEDs and decorative fabrics around the entire float were added. Anyway, getting back to those carolers, most notably in the 1990s version of the parade, they actually provided live vocal performances alongside the underliner soundtrack. This was an element up through the 2000 season when, notably in 2001, they and the previously mentioned Village float were removed entirely, possibly due to cost-cutting measures following 9/11 and the fact that vocalists and musicians at the Disneyland Resort, no matter what venue, must be paid union rates, which are considerably more than what dancers are paid. Either way, for this season, the finale only consisted of Santa and his reindeer, as the aforementioned tree float would not be added until 2003. In 2002, performers returned to this unit, but not with the carolers, rather a small cavalcade of Disney characters appearing in their place, specifically featuring characters from Lilo and Stitch, which of course had just released the previous year. In 2003, the carolers made their long-awaited return with new golden costumes, but notably without their live vocal performances, likely due to budget concerns. These lasted another 2 seasons after, until following a refresh of the entire unit in 2005, they received new green costumes in 2006, the likes of which have continued to be seen in the parade ever since, becoming an iconic piece of the parade and signaling the arrival of Santa. Following the carolers and the tree are Santa's reindeer and the big man himself. While originally Santa appeared on a reused float from the Very Merry Christmas Parade, which depicted the sleigh gracefully flying above a city rooftop in the same vein as the previous Village float, it was replaced with a more whimsical North Pole float in 2005. This did, however, result in Pluto, who previously appeared as Rudolph on the previous float, being relocated to earlier in the parade. The previously appearing reindeer, affectionately known as the floppy tongue reindeer in later years, also received a refresh in 2005, when the costume mold was modernized. However, gone but not forgotten were the floppy tongue reindeer, as they continue to be seen as a nostalgic piece of Disneyland Christmases for years to come, and even received a special themed sipper in 2022. The new float sees Santa flying above a forest of Christmas trees in a sleigh that rocks back and forth. However, that feature did lead to a bizarre and somewhat comically tragic malfunction that occurred in 2018, where Santa was flung forward in his sleigh, left dangling in the harness with the presents from his toy sack behind him smashing into his face. The float would remain absent for a few weeks while repairs and safety checks were done in the interim. But for this short time, closing out the parade would be the Toy Factory unit, notably making it a Christmas parade without the appearance of Santa Claus. The float did, however, return a bit later in the season. In fact, the float continues to be seen to this day, but it has seen a few changes. Between 2005 and 2022, there were these adorable rabbit figures that would periodically pop up from beneath the snow cover on the float. However, they were covered up entirely in 2023. The float also features a small gate at the back, presumably to Santa's North Pole workshop. However, here it acts as a platform for an additional 2 performers to interact with guests off the back. Of course, no parade would be complete without a rope to tie it all off, and this one is no exception. Originally carried by 3 additional carolers, in 1997 they were replaced with the current costumes for the performers, more of Santa's elves, matching the 2 elf performers on the back of the float in the same outfits added in 2005. However, while these are what appear in the parade up to the present, that doesn't mean there were some other choices made throughout the years. Notably, when in 2002, the elves were replaced with an all-female group of rope carriers in Santa Claus-themed glistening red skirts, coats, and Santa hats. These would end up lasting all the way through the 2016 season when the elves would end up returning to the rope in 2017. Due to the somewhat revealing nature of the costumes and the striking difference from the very comical and innocent nature of the elves, fans of the parade nicknamed these costumes the Santa Hose. Since 2017, however, the elves have stuck around up through today, making the end of our Christmas fantasy parade. Following the final loop of the soundtrack, the voice of the announcer comes on once again telling guests that we hope you've enjoyed our Christmas fantasy parade. We wish you all the joy and merriment that this holiday season may bring, today and every day throughout the new year. And that marks the end of Disneyland's A Christmas Fantasy Parade. Let's talk about it a little bit more in the conclusion. A Christmas Fantasy Parade is a Disneyland classic. From its very start, it's been adored by fans, young and old, people who are experiencing their first visits or their 100th. The parade is quintessential Disneyland at its finest. Sure, it's not the most modern, the most flashy, and God knows the soundtrack and choreography aren't especially the most modern thing compared to other holiday season offerings, but I think that kind of speaks to its timeless nature. Like, say what you will about Magic Happens, and believe me, I think I've said a lot about it already, both on air and off, but like it or not, you have to admit that in 10, 15, 20 years, the hip-hop and pop-esque-ness of the parade, and probably also to an extent its choreography, are going to look very dated and stuck in the 2020s. That's not saying those elements of Magic Happens aren't good, they're arguably the 2 best parts of the entire parade, but all the same, it still makes the parade a bit dated in the 2020s. All I'm saying is, A Christmas Fantasy wouldn't be half as much of a holiday classic as it has grown to be today if it had been cemented itself in the 1990s. I mean, come on, can you name a single song, or even more specifically, a single Christmas song that was a product of the 1990s that still holds strong in today's world? Okay, perhaps that was a bad example. My point is, Disneyland is supposed to be the charming park. The intimate one. The one where everything is just a stone's throw away and you'll run into many of the same guests in one day even if you're on completely separate paths. The one that throws operational headaches to the wind and just says, F it, let's put Alice in Wonderland directly on top of the show building for Mr. Toad. Putting a modern, hip, with the times sort of offering in this park it just feels so awkward. Like, we have a park that's perfect to throw all that new stuff in. Disney California Adventure has just as much of an identity crisis as anyone does living in 2023, so why not just give it all the modern stuff? I mean, Galaxy's Edge barely crosses that line into being okay at this park, and that's really only done by completely detaching that land from the rest of the park around it, and even then, I'd still argue it's not the best fit, but that's besides the point. A Christmas Fantasy Parade is a timeless classic in the way that any Disneyland Park show or attraction should be. It carries the classical and heartfelt nostalgic ways of the past and blends them with the artistry and operational standings of the present. It's just a perfect melding of those 2 worlds. And I'd be remiss if I didn't admit I have a bit of a personal stake in this too. In a world where I've now dedicated almost, 4 years of my life to immortalizing my memories of Disney entertainment in video form, even if in that time I've been known to take my extended downtimes, I've watched the way entertainment works around this company completely change. In a world where Festival of Fantasy returned with a full 10 performers in it, where it used to be close to 6 times that, to even Magic Happens having a significantly smaller performing cast than Soundsational, and even the parade itself being much shorter too, it's nice to still have this piece of entertainment that, frankly, I think management is too afraid to touch at this point, that rings the same old song year after year after year, and there's something very comforting about that. I talk about this all the time to my friends, but there's something really special about this parade when it comes to its performing talent specifically. In every single unit in Magic Happens, with the exception of the opening entourage and the Frozen dancers, every large unit in that parade has a maximum of 6 dancers, and then the small units have as few as 2 in the finale. That's always just been the biggest thing about Magic Happens that annoys me, because that just looks so wrong. Just seeing 2 guys carrying flags between the finale just doesn't feel very Disney. Disney has always prided itself on spectacle, on being the themed entertainment company that actually cares about that spectacle and the details within it and what it looks like. Magic Happens doesn't really live up to that. But with A Christmas Fantasy, the small units have an absolute minimum of 4, with the majority either supplemented by additional things like props or characters, and the larger units have almost always 8, but sometimes up to 12 performers per section. That's just a wonderful thing to see along Disneyland's parade route, because it feels like my childhood version of the company that did all that on a regular basis has come back to me. A Christmas Fantasy isn't a perfect parade. It does have some issues. The fact that the soundtrack doesn't loop does hold it back a bit and makes it feel especially old. The Frozen float looks like junk because they've rethemed it so many times it doesn't really look like anything specific now. And overall, yeah, it needs some updating. But that's just it. There's nothing with this parade that's an issue that cannot be fixed. You can build a new Frozen float. You can make the soundtrack loop. Kind of. You can give the thing a facelift every couple of years and make it look better than ever. And for the most part, yeah, that's exactly what happens. Obviously, the soundtrack hasn't changed, but honestly, I'm okay with that given how fantastic the song actually is. It hasn't really received a true, real, full update since 2014 when Frozen was added, but even as recently as this season, it's clear they're in the process of putting more life into it. For me, this parade represents every reason I'm a Disneyland girly at heart. I mean, compare this with literally any piece of Once Upon a Christmas Time at Magic Kingdom, a parade that, despite being newer in concept than A Christmas Fantasy, hasn't really been touched since its debut, aside from swapping characters in and out every so often and retiring floats when they get so old you can barely use them at all anymore. Once Upon a Christmas Time has its moments, but overall that parade just looks so old and cheap, and it's so clear that the life in that thing is draining. A Christmas Fantasy just doesn't feel that way. It feels more alive than ever and shows no signs of stopping anytime soon. If anything, it seems like other Christmas parades from around the world are more using ACF as an inspiration rather than upstaging it. I mean, look at Mickey's Dazzling Christmas Parade at Disneyland Paris, the newest Christmas parade from the parks worldwide. Obviously, it's not taking too much inspiration from ACF, it's mostly trying to do its own thing. But I mean, look at those Snowflakes costumes. Yeah, they're not on roller skates, but the colors and chromatic nature of them do look somewhat familiar. All this to say, I adore A Christmas Fantasy. Through all the changes over the almost 3 decades it's run, it seems just as spectacular as it's ever been. I remember vividly when in my final episode of the Parade Ranking Series, I put this at the number 2 spot for the best Disneyland Resort parade. Only being beat out by Walt Disney's Parade of Dreams, which is just... I mean, I'm sorry, nothing comes close to that one when it comes to spectacle. But this parade just feels so special, intimate, and classic. That's kind of the amazing thing about the holidays at the Disneyland Resort. Disneyland Park remains this almost museum of holiday classics that have been barely altered, if at all, from the days they premiered with A Christmas Fantasy and the fireworks spectacular Believe in Holiday Magic. Then you can go over to Disney California Adventure and treat yourself to a modern Disney Christmas in the best way imaginable, with festival food booths from the Festival of the Holidays, the absolutely spectacular Viva Navidad street party with the 3 Caballeros, and possibly the greatest nighttime spectacular in Disney history worldwide with World of Color Season of Light. So I hope A Christmas Fantasy never goes away. It has enough life to keep it going for countless years to come, and if they continue updating it, as they have in the past, it could make it even longer. As we reach closer and closer to the show's 30th anniversary in 2025, we will all hopefully be able to delight in the joy and wonder this holiday classic brings to us annually. After all, the spirit of the season will make our dreams come true. Memories of Christmas are here for me and you through caroling, bells ringling, and Santa Claus will always be part of Christmas Fantasy. Thank you for joining in the merriest season of all and watching this episode of Remember the Magic. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking the video and subscribing to my YouTube channel. There are more videos coming out that you won't want to miss, so be sure to click the bell icon so you get notified when we upload a new video. We also have Instagram and Twitter, so be sure to follow us on there to keep up to date with any ridiculous things I might be up to. Links to those in the description below. If you have any topics, suggestions for what you think I should cover on this show and others, leave them in the comments below. And remember, cherish the holidays forever and always believe. Have a great, big, beautiful day, and remember, tomorrow is just a dream away.
Christmas.